The night air clung heavy over the misted valley, a foreboding silence settling on the land as though nature itself held its breath. The moon hung pale and cold, silvering the ragged peaks and casting long, claw-like shadows across the dirt road that cut through the wilderness. Along that road rode Vlad, a young man of 22, his black hair loose and wild around his face, his jaw sharp, his expression set like stone. His horse snorted clouds of frost into the frigid air, hooves muffled against the half-frozen ground. He was returning home after years as a hostage in a foreign court, a place where every meal tasted of suspicion, and every glance carried hidden threats. He had learned diplomacy there and cruelty, and above all, patience. The boy who had been taken had died long ago. In his place was a man who understood that fear was the surest weapon of all. The castle appeared on the horizon just as the first light bled into the sky, its towers jutting like dark teeth against the bruised dawn. Vlad reined in his horse and stared. This was no longer the home he remembered. Its walls bore scars from recent sieges. Its banners hung tattered, and the air seemed thick with the memory of violence. Inside the great hall, his return was met not with cheers but with wary eyes. The boyars, the lords of the realm, whispered among themselves, their jeweled fingers twitching as though they wished to reach for daggers. They remembered his father's fate, how he had been betrayed and murdered, and perhaps they wondered if this son would be weak enough to suffer the same. Vlad's gaze cut through the hall like a drawn sword, meeting each man's eyes until they looked away. At the long table sat his younger brother, Radu, softer in face, smiling with a charm that Vlad found hollow. Their reunion was strained. Radu had chosen a different path during their years abroad, embracing their captors and even finding favor in their court. To Vlad, it felt like betrayal. That night, in the privacy of his chamber, Vlad stood by the window, watching the torches flicker along the walls below, his fists clenched. This land was his by blood, yet every shadow seemed to whisper that it belonged to someone else. The boyars, the foreign sultans, even his brother. He swore under his breath that he would take it back, no matter the cost. The next morning, as the sun burned away the last of the mist, Vlad summoned the council. He spoke calmly, his voice low but cutting, declaring that from this day forth there would be no divided loyalties, no secret plots. Those who served him faithfully would be rewarded. Those who schemed against him would find no mercy. The lords shifted uneasily, some nodding, others bristling. They had heard such threats before from kings who later bled in the mud. But there was something in Vlad's eyes, a cold, unyielding fire, that made even the boldest of them hesitate. Far beyond the castle walls, a storm was gathering. Vlad could almost taste it in the air, metallic and sharp. The dawn had come red as blood, and he knew it was an omen. His reign would be carved not in gold but in terror. The day of Vlad's first decree dawned cold and clear. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the castle as if the fortress itself exhaled, bracing for what was to come. Inside the great hall, preparations were underway for a lavish banquet, one that would gather every boyar, every whisperer and schemer, under one roof. Vlad dressed deliberately for the occasion. His black hair was bound loosely at the nape, his tunic plain but perfectly fitted, his boots polished until they gleamed. He wanted no gold or jewels to distract from the severity of his presence. When he entered the hall, the murmurs ceased as if cut away by a knife. The tables were heavy with food, roasted boar, bowls of steaming grains, fruits glistening with honey. But the tension in the air was sharper than hunger. The boyars raised cups to toast the young lord's return. But Vlad noticed how some eyes flicked toward one another, calculating, as though they were already plotting how to use this gathering against him. He let them settle before rising to speak. His voice carried with unnerving calm. Tonight we honor the land that gave us life, but we must also speak of what has poisoned it. He allowed silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. My father was betrayed under the very roofs where we now sit. I will not allow that shadow to remain. Some shifted uneasily. Others tried to mask their smirks. One older boyar, a man with a long white beard and heavy rings, stood and said coldly, "We are loyal servants of Wallachia. If your father fell, it was the will of fate." Vlad's gaze fixed on him, unblinking. "Then tonight we begin rewriting fate." At his signal, guards appeared at the doors. The hall seemed to shrink as realization spread through the crowd. One by one, Vlad named those who had conspired against his father, names passed to him by informants, names he had memorized for this night. The accused were dragged forward, their protests drowned by the scrape of steel on stone as soldiers drew their blades. The punishments were swift and final. Some were executed where they stood. Others were taken away to face judgment at dawn. Blood stained the rushes on the floor, the rich smell of it mingling with the feast, turning the air sickly sweet. When it was done, Vlad turned back to the table, his face unreadable. "Tonight we dine together," he said. "Let this be the last night we must speak of treachery. Serve your land faithfully, and you will live to see its glory restored." The surviving boyars nodded stiffly, some pale as wax. Fear had entered their bones, not just fear of death, but of the man who had summoned them with one hand and judged them with the other. Later that night, Vlad stood alone in the courtyard looking up at the stars. The air smelled of smoke and iron. He felt no remorse, only a grim satisfaction. Order had been restored, and the first brick of his reign had been laid, not in mortar, but in blood. Far away, across the Danube, word of the night's events would soon reach foreign ears. Enemies would take notice. Some would come seeking to crush him. Vlad welcomed the thought. Let them come. He had shown his land who ruled it. Now he would show the world. The following weeks were marked by a strange, taut stillness across Wallachia. Word of the feast had spread like a winter storm, rolling through villages and monasteries alike. People spoke of Vlad's justice in hushed voices, some with awe, others with dread. It was said that the land itself felt different, quieter, as though the very earth listened for the sound of his steps. But quiet never lasted long in Wallachia. One crisp morning, a horn sounded from the watchtower above the castle gates. Vlad emerged from his chambers to find his captains already assembled. Below, a small party of riders approached. Ottoman envoys, clad in flowing silk robes and turbans, their horses snorting clouds into the frosty air. They carried no weapons, only the sealed scroll of their sultan. The envoys were brought into the great hall where Vlad waited. The lead emissary, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and calm, practiced manner, bowed only slightly before presenting the message. It was a demand, tribute from Wallachia, more gold than before, and hostages to guarantee obedience. Vlad unrolled the parchment slowly, eyes scanning each line, face unreadable. The hall was so silent that the crackle of the torches seemed deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost too soft. "You ask for more gold," he said, "when my people starve. You ask for more sons when they have buried too many." The emissary did not flinch. "These are the Sultan's terms. Refusal would be dangerous." Vlad's gaze sharpened. He stepped closer until they stood nearly face to face. "Tell your master," he said, "that Wallachia is not a lamb to be led to slaughter. If he wishes more gold, he may dig it from the soil with his own hands. If he wishes more sons, he may sire them himself." A flicker of alarm crossed the emissary's face, but still he bowed, offering the ritual of respect, to remove his turban in acknowledgement of Vlad's authority. He hesitated. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps fear of sacrilege. Vlad's eyes narrowed. He gave an order. Guards seized the emissaries. The hall erupted into murmurs, then fell silent again as the envoys were brought to the courtyard. Vlad commanded that their turbans be nailed to their heads, a punishment meant not only to humiliate, but to send a message that no foreign power could dictate ritual or sovereignty in his land. The punishment was swift and brutal, though blood was minimal. The emissaries were sent back alive but shamed, their dignity pierced as surely as their flesh. That night, Vlad stood atop the castle wall, watching the torches of the departing party fade into the dark horizon. He knew this act would provoke retaliation, but fear, he reasoned, was stronger than gold. Fear could hold a land together when treaties and promises failed. In the days that followed, Vlad began building his terrible reputation deliberately. Villages that harbored thieves or deserters found themselves facing executions, their corpses displayed along the roads as grim warnings. Rumors spread faster than truth, that Vlad could see betrayal in a man's heart, that his punishments were devised by devils, and so, slowly, the land fell into order. Not peace, for peace was too soft a word, but obedience born of terror. Vlad felt no joy in it, only grim satisfaction. His father's death had taught him that mercy without power was weakness. He would not be weak again. From the south came whispers of Ottoman fury. Their armies would march sooner or later. Vlad welcomed the thought. His enemies would come, and he would show them what fear truly meant. The news came at dusk as ravens circled the castle towers. A host was crossing the Danube. The Ottomans had answered Vlad's insult with an army, swift and brutal. Scouts reported columns of horsemen and foot soldiers moving like a dark river through the countryside, burning villages that refused to provide supplies. Vlad gathered his captains in the council chamber. The firelight flickered across their grim faces. Some argued for surrender. Better to pay gold than lose the land entirely. Others demanded a stand at the river crossings. Vlad listened in silence, his fingers steepled before rising to speak. "No," he said, his voice cold as iron. "We will not meet them in the open, nor will we bow. If they bring war, we give them fear." That night his plans were set into motion. Villagers near the invasion route were evacuated under cover of darkness. Bridges were destroyed, wells poisoned, livestock driven into the forests. What the Ottomans expected to plunder turned to ash and shadow under their boots. When the first Ottoman raiding party entered an abandoned village, they found nothing but silence, and then screams. Vlad's men fell upon them from the tree line, striking with spears and arrows, vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The forest became an ally, swallowing sound and light. But fear alone was not enough. Vlad knew he had to make an example. The next captured Ottoman patrol was brought to a clearing. Vlad stood before them, his cloak dark as night, torchlight dancing across his face. There was no trial, no speech. The prisoners were executed and their bodies displayed in grotesque tableaux along the road, their corpses arranged with a cruel artistry that turned the clearing into a place of nightmare. Word spread swiftly through the Ottoman ranks. Soldiers spoke of demons in the woods, of a prince who dined among the dead. Fear gnawed at discipline. Some deserted. Others burned villages indiscriminately, further enraging the local peasants who joined Vlad's cause. As winter approached, the campaign turned desperate. The Ottomans were harried day and night, their supplies dwindling. Disease and cold took as many as the sword. Vlad moved like a phantom through the countryside, striking here, vanishing there, always just out of reach. One moonless night, he and his men crept into an enemy camp disguised as Ottoman soldiers, killing sentries silently with knives. Fires were lit in dozens of places at once, sowing chaos. Horses panicked, tents collapsed, and the sky turned red with smoke. By morning, the army was in disarray, its commanders shaken. When the invaders finally withdrew, they left behind a land scarred but unbroken, and a name that would haunt them. Vlad, the Impaler, the Prince of Fear. He stood on a hill overlooking the empty battlefield, frost crunching under his boots. The air smelled of smoke and pine. His men stood behind him, waiting. "This is only the beginning," Vlad said quietly. "Let them come again. I will turn this whole country into a forest of death if I must. They will learn to fear the very earth they walk upon." The captains bowed their heads. The war was not over. It had only begun. Winter had melted into early spring, yet the land remained scarred and uneasy. Vlad had fortified every mountain pass, every river crossing, knowing the Ottoman forces would not rest. Reports arrived daily, new regiments, larger than before, marching with disciplined precision, their banners gleaming under the weak sun. They came not only for gold or tribute, but for revenge. Vlad convened his captains once more. The great hall smelled of pine smoke and melted wax. Maps were spread across oak tables, ink smudged from many hands. Vlad's eyes scanned the lines of strategy, tracing the routes the enemy might take, calculating every possibility. "This is not a war of numbers," he said softly, yet each word carried weight. "It is a war of fear, of discipline, of cunning. If they underestimate us, they will fall. If we falter, even for a moment, they will destroy us all." The captains nodded, though some faces betrayed anxiety. They had seen Vlad's methods, known his ruthlessness, yet the enemy now was larger, better equipped, more experienced. Even Vlad felt a flicker of uncertainty, a reminder that no plan, however cunning, could account for every chance of fate. By nightfall, scouts reported the Ottoman army approaching Targovishte, Wallachia's fortified heart. Vlad divided his forces into small mobile units, instructing them to strike and vanish, leaving false trails of retreat, only to regroup behind hills and in dense forests. Every village, every road, every bridge became a stage for ambush. The first clash occurred at dawn. A vanguard of Ottoman cavalry, confident and arrogant, rode into a narrow valley. Hidden on the slopes above, Vlad's men unleashed a torrent of arrows. Horses reared, riders fell, chaos erupted. Smoke and dust hung in the air as soldiers scrambled to regroup. Vlad's face remained calm atop a ridge, eyes cold, lips pressed tight. Hours later, he led a frontal engagement. Unlike the ambushes, this was a calculated risk. Vlad rode at the head of his men, his cloak dark against the pale morning, black hair catching the wind. The clash was ferocious, steel ringing against steel, dust clouding vision, the smell of smoke and churned earth overwhelming. Vlad's strategy relied on psychological warfare as much as skill. He struck not only at bodies but at morale. His men shouted, waved banners, and left behind gruesome signs of what awaited the careless, yet always from a distance, maintaining a psychological edge. Yet even the Prince of Fear could not fully control the storm of battle. In the afternoon, an Ottoman unit broke through a weak point in Vlad's line. Villagers conscripted as militia panicked and fled, leaving gaps that cost men dearly. Vlad felt the sting of loss personally. Several of his closest lieutenants fell. He cursed under his breath, feeling a cold, bitter anger. Victory was not a certainty, and the price of war was more than strategy. It was blood, sweat, and suffering. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the weary, wounded, and dead. Vlad gathered his surviving men atop a hill, overlooking the valley. Lanterns flickered like fireflies, the air thick with exhaustion and fear. He spoke softly, not as a commander but as a man who knew the weight of responsibility. "Fear brought them here," he said, "and fear will keep them away. But never forget, the land we protect is our own, and no army can take it from those who defend it with cunning and courage." The clash at Targoviste became legend. Ottoman forces withdrew to regroup, and though Vlad had suffered losses, his psychological grip on Wallachia strengthened. The people whispered of his cunning, his ruthlessness, and the terrifying precision of his vengeance. Vlad knew this war was far from over. It had only begun to test the limits of his resolve. By the heat of summer, Wallachia had become a land of whispered legends and trembling hearts. The Ottoman reinforcements approached once more, larger than any previous army, their banners catching the sunlight like fire. Villagers fled to the forests, leaving empty homes and fields, while scouts reported the enemy moving with measured precision. Vlad convened his council under the open sky, the air heavy with the scent of pine and sweat. His captains, though hardened by previous skirmishes, shifted uneasily under his penetrating gaze. Vlad's plan was simple in concept but ruthless in execution. Strike fear so deep it would become an ally, weaponizing the land itself. "Do not meet them in open fields," he commanded. "Let the forest and hills be our allies. Let the wind and shadow strike before the enemy can draw a breath." The next days were a choreography of fear and deception. Wooden stakes were planted along narrow passes, not to impale in direct combat, but to create the impression of lurking doom. Fires were set at strategic intervals, smoke curling into the sky, guiding the enemy into traps. Villagers conscripted as guides were given orders that seemed simple: mislead, confuse, and vanish. When the Ottoman advance encountered these preparations, confusion spread like wildfire. Cavalry charged through narrow valleys only to find blocked paths, dead ends, and sudden ambushes. The air was thick with tension, the clatter of armor echoing against cliffs and distant cries amplified by the hollow forests. Vlad's men struck swiftly and then melted away, leaving signs of terror, abandoned banners, overturned carts, and eerie silhouettes of wooden stakes that suggested horrors beyond imagination. The psychological effect was devastating. Ottoman commanders, once confident, now hesitated, fearing the invisible enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. Rumors spread of a prince who commanded the shadows, who could strike without warning, who transformed the very land into a weapon. Yet for all his cunning, Vlad paid a price. His own men, conscripts and soldiers alike, suffered exhaustion and injury. The constant vigilance demanded by guerrilla-style warfare left even the hardiest trembling under the relentless heat. Vlad walked among them at night, checking each unit, encouraging the fearful, chastising the reckless. His eyes, dark and sharp, reflected both pride and the burden of responsibility. In one decisive engagement, a regiment of Ottoman soldiers pursued what they thought was a retreating Wallachian unit into a dense forest. Mist and shadows concealed the true size of Vlad's force. From the treetops and behind rocks, arrows rained silently. The enemy panicked, some fleeing into traps set by other units, their formations dissolving. No bloodshed was shown directly, yet the terror, the chaos, and the cries of confusion conveyed the full weight of Vlad's psychological warfare. By the end of summer, the Ottoman army, battered, demoralized, and uncertain, withdrew once more. Villagers returned cautiously, their fear of Vlad tempered by gratitude for protection. He stood atop a cliff, overlooking the river valleys, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. His cloak flapped in the wind, hair dark against the dying light. The land bore the scars of war, yet the enemy had learned what it meant to confront the Prince of Shadows. Vlad understood the path ahead would only grow more treacherous. Each victory came with a toll, each maneuver a strain on both mind and body. But fear, he knew, was his ally, and Wallachia his domain. The summer had proven the potency of terror as a weapon, a lesson that would echo for generations. The following autumn brought with it a chill that gnawed at both bones and morale. Vlad knew the Ottomans would not forgive their summer humiliation. Reports arrived from scouts, larger forces advancing, seasoned veterans determined to break the Prince of Wallachia. Yet Vlad's mind remained unshaken. He had prepared for this eventuality, anticipating their fury and orchestrating a counter that relied as much on fear as on force. Deep within Targovishte, Vlad convened a council in the vaulted chamber of the fortress. Stone walls absorbed the echoes of whispered strategies, flickering torchlight throwing long shadows. His captains, weary but loyal, studied maps with precise attention, tracing the anticipated movements of the Ottoman reinforcements. "Strike where they are weakest," Vlad instructed, voice low but commanding. "Let them find nothing but despair. Their fear will work in our favor, but only if they believe it is inevitable." Soon the first clashes began at the edges of Wallachia. Vlad's forces, nimble and knowing the terrain intimately, struck swiftly, burning supply lines, collapsing bridges, and leaving the enemy disoriented. Villagers whispered tales of invisible assailants, shadows that moved without bodies and cries that seemed to come from the forest itself. The psychological terror mounted with each nightfall. Captured Ottoman soldiers were brought before Vlad not merely for interrogation, but as instruments of fear. In a dimly lit chamber, their eyes wide with dread, he displayed a tableau that was meant to unnerve rather than injure. Prisoners bound and arranged to witness the aftermath of traps set against their comrades. They were made to understand that every misstep, every act of arrogance carried consequences beyond imagination. Vlad spoke to them calmly, almost philosophically, explaining that Wallachia was a land governed by strategy and vigilance, and that their survival depended on obedience and awareness of unseen perils. Outside the fortress, Vlad's army set night ambushes along narrow passes and dense forests. Torches burned in false locations, and the silhouettes of figures moved in ways designed to suggest a force far larger than reality. The Ottomans, seasoned soldiers though they were, found themselves unnerved by the relentless uncertainty. Morale faltered. Commanders quarreled. The Prince of Wallachia's reputation for cunning and ruthlessness spread like wildfire across the ranks. Yet the price was heavy. Vlad's men, constantly on alert, suffered exhaustion and illness. Every successful ambush cost him dearly in manpower. Vlad walked among them, inspecting injuries, offering grim reassurance, his eyes dark and sharp under the hood of his cloak. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him, yet he remained resolute. Wallachia's survival demanded both genius and cruelty in equal measure. One decisive night, a large Ottoman unit ventured too far into the forest, chasing what they believed was a retreating contingent. Vlad's hidden forces struck with precision, herding them into a labyrinth of natural traps. The prisoners who survived were brought to the fortress, their faces pale, eyes haunted. Vlad's method was not bloodshed for spectacle, but calculated terror, a lesson in the cost of hubris and misjudgment. By the end of autumn, Ottoman forces had retreated once more, shaken to the core by the relentless cunning of their adversary. Vlad stood atop the fortress walls, wind tugging at his cloak, eyes scanning the darkening horizon. Victory had been achieved, but at great cost, both to his men and to the fragile civility of his domain. Wallachia remained free, yet the shadows that had protected it grew ever darker, a reflection of the burdens carried by the prince who ruled from them. Winter crept over Wallachia, a pale frost coating the hills and forests. The final Ottoman force approached, larger and more determined than any before. News of Vlad's prior victories had spread far and wide, and this time, their commanders were both fearful and vengeful. Yet Vlad remained resolute. The harsh season would be his ally as much as the terrain. He inspected his forces at dawn, the cold air biting through his cloak. Soldiers, weary from continuous campaigns, huddled around small fires, their breath misting in the frigid light. Vlad moved among them, sharp-eyed and silent, assessing readiness. His mind churned through strategies, every ambush, every trap, every psychological ploy carefully calculated. The battle commenced in the mountain passes, snow and mist obscured vision, and Vlad's forces struck with ghostly precision. Fires and smoke created illusions of massive units, while small detachments attacked from unexpected angles. The Ottoman army, despite its size and experience, found itself disoriented, each step uncertain. Panic crept through their ranks. Captured soldiers were brought into the fortress once more. Vlad did not harm them physically, but the prison chambers were designed to instill dread. Prisoners were shown the aftermath of failed assaults, shattered wagons, abandoned encampments, and signs of hidden forces lurking in the forests. The aim was to make fear a weapon as lethal as any sword. Vlad addressed them calmly, explaining the consequences of misjudgment, his voice carrying the weight of both logic and legend. Amid the chaos, Vlad himself led a daring strike on a small Ottoman detachment, cutting off their retreat through a frozen river. The attack was swift and merciless in its precision, yet he avoided excessive bloodshed in line with his strategy: terror and awe, rather than mass slaughter. His troops carried out each maneuver with disciplined efficiency, shadows and snow masking their numbers and movements. As the Ottoman army finally retreated, Vlad stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley. Snow swirled around him, cloak flapping in the icy wind, eyes dark and reflective. The land bore scars of conflict, yet it was free. Wallachia had survived, not through sheer numbers, but through fear, strategy, and the meticulous orchestration of shadows. In the aftermath, villagers cautiously emerged, murmuring tales of a prince who ruled through shadow and terror. Vlad's name became legend, his methods studied by both allies and enemies. Yet the weight of leadership was evident in his solemn expression. Each victory carried the burden of decisions that balanced survival with the ethics of power. He understood that fear, while a tool, could also isolate him, leaving him a ruler surrounded by loyalty born of necessity rather than love. Winter's quiet enveloped the land, and Vlad reflected upon the relentless path he had chosen. The forests, hills, and passes of Wallachia had been his instruments of survival, his army a shadow of menace that had preserved the realm. But he knew that the dance with darkness and fear was eternal, a legacy etched not only in the chronicles of soldiers and villagers, but in the very soul of Wallachia.